Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're thankful you've chosen to join Vogue Business, our senior sustainability editor, Rachel Cernansky, and our esteemed panelists, Marie-Claire Daveau, Dr. Rubana Huq, and Ken Webster, for this session titled Fashion's Circular Future, From Concept to Reality. I also want to thank the World Economic Forum for hosting us during Davos Agenda Week. Having the opportunity, such as this one, to bring together influential leaders across every sector for such engaging debate and discussion is important to making the changes we all want to see in the world. We're here today to talk about the climate crisis, which is a priority issue for us as a global media company. At Condé Nast, many of our brands like Wired, GQ, The New Yorker, and Vogue are dedicated to reporting about climate change. It's also a priority issue for us as a global workforce, and we have year-round efforts dedicated to helping us be a leader for change, especially with regards to the fashion industry. In fact, in 2019, Condé Nast became the first media company to sign the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action. This helped inspire our company-wide commitment to mitigate our global carbon footprint, and we're on track to achieve our goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. Last year, we launched the Sustainable Fashion Glossary in partnership with the Center for Sustainable Fashion at the London College of Fashion. The glossary is a free global resource, so we can all begin using a common language for understanding fashion's role in charting a new future of sustainability. Lastly, it's been great to see Vogue Business, which just launched in 2019, grow such a loyal following because, in part, of its coverage on sustainability efforts across the fashion, luxury, and beauty industries. It's our fervent hope that we will continue to be a resource for professionals and businesses around the world on these issues. Thank you again for joining us, and now I'll hand it over to Rachel to lead this important conversation.
Thanks for that, Roger. I'm so excited to be here with this incredible group. Welcome, everyone. I'm Rachel Cernansky, Sustainability Editor for Vogue Business. Thank you for joining this discussion, Fashion's Circular Future from Concept to Reality. Thanks to the World Economic Forum for inviting us to be a part of the Davos Agenda Week, and of course to our panelists for being here today. Please note this session is on the record and will be available on demand on the Vogue Business website. Before we jump in, since circularity is something that I'm noticing people are starting to define for themselves, rightly or not, I want to first lay out what it actually is. A circular economy flips the so-called linear economy on its head. Instead of using resources once, maybe twice, before they end up in a landfill, a circular system is one that eliminates waste and keeps resources in use again and again. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which has helped to put circularity at the forefront of global conversations, has said that the equivalent of a garbage truck full of clothing is burned or buried in a landfill every single second. Transitioning fashion to a circular model would involve changes like reusing and recycling more materials, using different materials, tackling problems that are often hidden from the average consumer, like chemical pollution, and driving more systemic changes, such as moving some manufacturing closer to where clothes are used and discarded. That's not to mention other changes like consumer behavior that will be necessary to make it all possible. It's hard to overstate what a massive endeavor it is, probably for any industry, but for fashion in particular. At the same time, circularity as a concept is not a new one. It's something that essentially defined the way of life for Indigenous communities, for example, for much of history. And I think that's worth recognizing and reflecting on as we look to the path ahead. I'm excited to have this fantastic panel here today to talk about how exactly we can make the circular model a reality. We have Marie-Claire Daveau, Chief Sustainability Officer at Kering. For those who don't know, Kering is the multi-billion-dollar luxury group that owns Gucci, Balenciaga, and other well-known brands. Under Marie-Claire, the company has raised the bar for how a fashion company can work on sustainability. We're also joined by Dr. Rubana Huq. She's the first woman to lead the Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association, and peers from across the industry have applauded her leadership through the pandemic and the turmoil it's caused for brands and manufacturers alike. And we have Ken Webster, a founding member of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and now the director of the International Society for Circular Economy. He's been one of the key ideas people behind the growing efforts on the circular economy. And with that, let's get started. Marie-Claire, I hope you'll kick us off. Why has circularity become such a buzzword in fashion, and how realistic is the goal?
So first, hello everyone, and thank you for this invitation. I'm very pleased to be able to share with the other panelists the discussion around circular economy. So we all know the impact of fashion industry on the planet. We all know the facts and the figures. Only to share one, 4% of our greenhouse gas emission is coming from the fashion world. So we can understand very quickly that there is a kind of urgency to move and to change the paradigm. So that's why to shift from a linear model to a circular one, I think it's really one of the key challenges we have at the level of our industry. If I come back to the level of Kering, I would like to share with you that at Kering, circularity and sustainability have been a key focus for several years. When we put in place and when we wrote our strategy for 2025 in 2016, we defined a dedicated chapter to new business models. And beyond new business models, we have include circular economy. So what we try to do at the level of Kering is to have a clear definition about what it means for our brands and for the production. So we have defined guidelines. We did that 3 years ago. They are inside what we call our Kering standards. And I think something that it's quite also important, because if we want to push the industry, it's really to have transparency. So we open source these Kering standards. After, to jump in your definition, when we think about the challenge we have in our industry, we have also to think about circularity as is one of the solutions, but it's not the only one, because we have, of course, to work also on the raw materials we choose in our products, so to be sure that they have the less impact on the environmental side. They have also all the social criteria included in the way that they are produced, and also in the manufacturing processes, to be sure that we put in place the best practices. To answer, I would like to say, if you think as a brand, we need to rethink how to produce also, because as we said, the starting point is very important. So of course, circular economy is one of the solutions, but also to produce fair amount of products, it's also key. So we work with our two legs.
Okay, thanks for that. And Ken, can you put the fashion industry into a global context for this concept of the circular economy?
Yeah, like many businesses, they are fully embedded in a linear system at the moment. I think everybody in both the business and the policy arenas realize this, and because it is so important, we're going to have to look at the system conditions which promote a linear economy. So while business, and there really are lots of experiments with different business models, subscription models, debranding and all sorts of things, a linear economy is driven by cheap fossil fuels. And it's also driven by very, and perhaps too cheap labor as well. So you get a very low price point. And if you've got a very low price point, you don't have the value in the discarded material that makes it very attractive to do anything with, which is interesting to business. And it also transfers the cost, of course, onto the public arena. So I'm very, very keen on seeing moves towards readdressing this artificial cheapness of fossil fuels, because you know that globally fossil fuels, and there's lots and lots of obviously textiles derived from fossil fuels. 5 trillion a year is the degree of subsidy towards fossil fuels globally, which is about the GDP of Japan. So I think we could use a little bit more market sensibility there. In other words, prices are there to send messages. And at the moment, all the efforts towards circularity are being undermined by a distorted market. And so I think in the end, we're going to have to look at some of these established system conditions, or else it'll be very hard to make the degree of shift that I think everybody in business, in the supply chain, and policymakers are anxious to see. But it's a tough one.
Mm-hmm. So for you, it starts with fossil fuel subsidies. Basically.
Well, that also subsidizes cotton production, for instance, and cheap fertilizers. Right. So I'd like to see prices tell more of the truth, and therefore we can get a more realistic market going in this. Okay. That's my point, and I think that pushes it a bit beyond, say, waste framework directives or anything strictly practical. It's more in the medium to long term. We're going to have to look at this for climate change reasons anyway. So, let's get ahead of the curve.
Okay. Rubana or Marie-Claire, do you have anything to add or respond to on that?
No, nothing in addition. I think perhaps to say that every sector, and not only the fashion industry, is concerned by circularity. So that's why also it's very important to develop cross-fertilization between the different sectors.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So let's talk about what happens to the existing supply chain in a circular economy if we can push these ideas forward. If we're able to get to a place where we're recycling old clothes into new clothes rather than using cotton from a traditional cotton supplier, for example, that's clearly going to impact the factories and workers who currently make all of our clothes. Rubana, if the industry is successful in shifting to a circular economy, what happens to the jobs that millions of workers currently rely on?
Thank you for having me here. First of all, what I'd like to say is circularity cannot just be a concept. It has to be a process which will involve every stakeholder. I mean, there is no alternative to circularity as well. I mean, all of us know that we're consuming our resources of the earth 1.7 times higher than its capacity. And we stand at a point where we cannot afford to lose virgin material at all at the rate we are consuming now. So we have a huge role to play. And yes, when you talk about consuming less, and when a consumer buys less, we produce less. So how do we balance it? Where do we find the balance? And how do we make sure that sustainability also and circularity also contribute to sustainable livelihoods, without which our workers, we have in Bangladesh alone, we have 4.1 million workers. So if a consumer is not consuming enough, then we are at a loss. But then again, Bangladesh only produces 5 basic products. So it is time for us also, with this huge capacity that we have to move on to value-added chains, to value-added products, so that the country concept of Bangladesh has to be supported by higher value addition instead of just sticking to basics. So we have to make the shift from our end, and at the same time, we need the global fashion industry to believe in Bangladesh's capability and capacity to produce better products, so that even if we produce less, we will still be able to make sure that our workers have jobs, and that instead of cheap labor, we would opt for competitive labor. And without that balance, we will be at risk. So while we talk about closing the loop, while we talk about everything that we can think of in terms of circularity, I will just bring to your attention that there are many measures that we can also take at our end. For instance, around 400,000 tons of post-production textile waste is produced annually. But, we never concentrate on the recyclable waste. So since the size of average Bangladeshi factory is much larger than any other country, it is of great interest to ourselves that, waste should be more standardized. And there are larger volumes of the same waste being produced in the same location, so we can make good use of it. So, it's time that we talk about circularity from a different point of view. For instance, when we talk about 65% of the textiles and garments being produced, essentially being cotton and cotton rich. Cotton is the most recyclable waste composition at this moment. So majority of the manufacturers could be engaging in that. So we need a circular economy policy in Bangladesh, actually, and we need to align it with the global demand as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Do you, just a quick follow-up, do you think that the industry brands and other manufacturers are taking those questions into account adequately as they engage in all the circularity conversation?
Most certainly. Rachel, we have also been working with Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and also we have signed up with UNFCCC. So, our commitment is there. And while we do this, we're absolutely aware that the world's changing and there's no looking back. And Bangladesh being where it is right now, we have one of the most compliant structural, electrical and fire infrastructure in the factories now. We have remediated and we have great factories out here. But if we don't concentrate on the environment, if we do not talk about promoting responsible consumerism, then we will ourselves be at a loss. So we have no other option but to be acutely aware. I'm sure but 7 out of 10 factories, greenest factories in the world, belong to Bangladesh. And this is a story which is not known. And along with the industry, there's the tale of millions of workers that need to be told to the Western consumer in a more meaningful way, so that when the consumer wears their second skin, which is the apparel, they might as well also consider where they're sourcing it from. So instead of a red no tag to Bangladesh, maybe the lives and the livelihood stories could be told dramatically differently through international platforms like ours. So yes, the industry is getting ready, and the industry will remain engaging with the concept of circularity for many, many more decades to come.
Okay, great, thank you. Marie-Claire or Ken, do you have any additional thoughts on how we can ensure that the push for a circular economy is equitable and one that works for everyone?
It's for me, when you are speaking about the social side, it's obvious that we have to link it with the circular economy, but it's more something where you have to pay attention for all the raw materials you are using, for all the conditions for the workers inside our supply chain. So for me, this topic of social is not only linked with circular economy, but it's a broader subject. Because we are also in luxury, our supply chain is quite different, because over 90% of our suppliers are based in Europe and in Italy. So luxury is a little bit specific when you are speaking about supply chain. If we jump on supply chain and the environmental side, for me, the future of fashion should be regenerative by design. So it means where raw materials can be used again and again in a circular system. So how we work with our suppliers and the supply chain We think at Kering that if you don't measure what you are doing, you are not good and you won't be operational. So at the level of the group, we began work on what we call measuring circularity of our materials at the end of 2019, drawing on the methodology developed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And we applied it at the level of the group for the raw materials we are using. And I think something that is interesting to share with you is the fact that 39% of the materials currently used by the group with potential for circularity are already circular. So you can say that it's not enough, but it's already, I think, a very important one step. And also perhaps to continue on the supply chain, and of course always with the social dimension you underline, because also thanks to our EPNL, we measure our impacts for several years now. We have created, for example, the Material Innovation Lab in 2013, the Sustainable Innovation Lab in 2020, really to identify sustainable materials, recycle materials, of course, each time paying attention with the social dimension. And today, where we are very happy, is to see that it's a reality between this supply chain and our own collection. So to give you two recent examples, we have Gucci of the Grid collection. It's the first collection from Gucci circular lines. Or more recently, we have Balenciaga with what we call the pre-collection summer 21 last year, where over 90% of the blend materials are either certified sustainable or upcycled. So I think it's also very important to make the link, above all in our industry, luxury sector, between the designer, the design team, and the supply chain. And again, it's obvious that social side, it's key. But you know, in our strategy, at the beginning, I was mentioning that we have a specific pillar on new business model, one also on the environmental side, and of course, one specifically dedicated on social side and what is happening in the supply chain.
Okay, thank you. And Ken, I think you had something to add.
Yeah,
there.
I just wanted to pick up on this, and I think it is a real tension, particularly for fairly cheap products, you know, the generality, and particularly with mixed textiles. You know, it's not just cotton or any particular thing. And I think if we do move towards extended product responsibility, extended producer responsibility, and we do manage to get much more work located in Europe or in the USA. I've seen a sketch for a patent for sort of clothing on demand. They know your size. They'll make it immediately in highly automated factories. They'll recover the materials. You know, you can use top quality materials because you're going to get it back, and it makes that process a lot easier. I've seen sketches for that, and I think the Washington Wall Street Journal noted a couple of years ago that there might be as much as 8% job losses in some of the East Asian countries if that sort of system ever got into play. And so you can see that tension between husbanding materials, using quality materials which are recoverable, and the existing situation where there's an extended supply chain where many of the materials aren't going to get recovered. They're not going to go back to Bangladesh except as somewhere to send stuff that's not going to be dealt with in Europe. There's a lot of that dumping of materials back into other countries. And so I think this is a real challenge, and not at all easy to deal with, because on some side people will say, hey, we fixed the materials and energy problem. People get the clothes that they want, and if you add it to subscription services, just, you know, decorating the thinking there a bit, I think there's real challenge for Bangladesh and other places to say, what are they getting involved in, and what happens to their ability, or what happens to the opportunities they might have or might need to reorientate their work, as we've had mentioned already. So I think this is something that's going to end up in the arena of politics rather than just material science or marketing or supply chains, because with digital getting ever cheaper, a digital twin for products and components is showing up in durables, in construction. Maybe it ends up with materials passports when it comes to quality clothing and all sorts of clothing. Who knows? So I wouldn't underplay that. We might not all be in this together in a circular economy unless we can intelligently get this cooperation to change the rules of the game in a positive direction. But I want to just share that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think that's a good segue because I did want to talk about policy. So so maybe we'll do that now. Can you talk about, in thinking about both policy and just the realities of the global economy, what are the biggest obstacles to achieving circularity, and where are some opportunities for policy to
the big one is that waste isn't food. This stuff is not designed to be disassembled or recovered. And because that takes care and attention and a cost, if you don't have valuable material at the far end, what are you going to do? I'll just take an example of badging or logos on clothes. Well, they're very specific to a particular brand or a particular university or firm, whatever it might say. Can we get those back and take them off? Very often it's not really very easy at all. So work going into de-branding in the sense of de-badging materials might be of interest. And this is all going to lead us back to rules on use of materials and design. Asking municipalities and businesses to cope, that's all mixed up. I know the European Waste Framework Directive is mandating that textiles are separated. That has to be done by 2025, I think, in Europe. So we're going to see more separation of it. But if the material's not that useful, or lots of it isn't, it's like trying to get the egg out of the omelet. You sort of could do it, but not in a way that you'd want to really do anything with it. And I think it's all design-led. If we don't have the right materials flows in terms of what the materials are and knowing what it is and what it's suitable for, it's very hard to build the business end as the outputs come through. So always design-led, fairly radical thinking about what things are made of, and if we can, make sure there is a value in it that allows us to compete with the raw materials in its original output.
Yeah, and that seems a good moment to just sort of recognize that the companies that are committing to circularity with specific plans, with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation or others, that's part of their plan, designing things so that they can be disassembled.
Yeah, very much
taken
so.
off. But it's just getting more companies to do that.
So that's where the rules come in again, because you might say, if you're going to produce this sort of stuff and it's really mixed up and it's got a lot of difficulty in being dealt with, are you sure that's going to be free of penalties? If you keep producing this, we're going to charge you for the difficulty of dealing with it. And these are some of the little nudges and incentives that could come up. Pure cotton, great, we can do things with that. But even with, say, polyesters, you can't recycle it more than a couple of times before the molecules degrade. So you've got to be careful what you're asking for. A perfect system to, say, chemically recycle all the polyester. Well, I don't think that's going to help with all of those thousands and millions of microfibers that have gone down the rivers into the ocean because people have been washing their clothes. That's how difficult it is to see our way out of this unless we start at the design end and in a way mandate what is able to be put in the system rather than just how do we cope with what somebody's done.
Right. Well, Marie-Claire, can you talk about how Kering is adapting its supply chain and operations toward the goal of circularity?
Perhaps I would like to react to your previous question. I think when I see operationally speaking, the most important obstacle, it's about to change the mindset. Because after, when you think in the luxury sector, you have wonderful raw materials. So it's also to explain internally that with the waste of these raw materials, you can do something else, recycling or better upcycling. So it's one of the obstacles. The second obstacle, I think also is linked with the fact that to have operational solution all over the world where you are a big company and you operate in different countries, the solution the different solutions don't exist today. And I think also it's where, and to answer your question, where we try also to push and to support new entities. It can be startup, it can be to work with a university and school to elaborate solutions and to support them to grow. So after also, not luxury company will be able also to use and to develop circular economy. And the last thing to react about overproduction, because you mentioned overproduction, we have to be honest, circular economy is not the best way to address overproduction. That's why previously I was answering the fact that circular economy is one of the key tools, is one of the key solutions to have a sustainable business, but of course it's not the only one. And after, to add what we are doing in our supply chain, we invest also in a very early stage startups, because we believe a lot in the fact that we can find disruptive innovations. To give you a concrete example, a few years ago, we invest in a company startup called Warn Again, and they are able to separate the fibers of cellulose and polyester and to do new fibers. So it's a kind of holy grail where you will be able to use, to reuse the fibers to make new production. And of course, at the same time, you pay attention to your consumption of water and energy because you work in a closed loop system. But after, I think also when I listened to the other panelists, it encouraged me to really underline the fact that we need strong collaboration, because no one alone will be able to find a solution for every kind of product, every kind of raw materials. So that's why also very proactive collaboration between fast fashion, luxury, sport and lifestyle company. It's very important, and it's something that we try to develop through the Fashion Pact we put in place in 2019.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, it seems like sometimes it seems like there's sort of conversations happening in parallel, where there's a social conversation and an environmental, and it does seem like there needs to be more collaboration to connect the two. Rubana, do you have any examples of companies that are doing this well, or?
Sure. Rachel, actually there's a distinct disconnect between sourcing and the concept of circularity at this point of time, or even sustainability. So most of the brands that we work with, the Western brands, they have two separate teams. One team just talks about prices and spaces and, what's the capacity we can offer. And the other team just keeps on talking about the environment and the compliance. So, we have not been able to align that yet. And it is because of the brands that, we have actually given into being ready for fast fashion. So very honestly, I mean, in countries like Bangladesh, fast fashion culture of US and EU have actually rubbed off. And while we are moving towards circular economy, we have to be very cautious about the sudden transition, the change that's happening all over the world. Like my daughter, who's 28, will not buy anything extra till she really, really needs it. Or she will be looking at the tag, looking for the tag of organic, whether it's recycled. So, you know, the current generation is all about the earth. The current generation is all about responsibility. And I'm glad and proud that we have bred the next generation this way. But we haven't prepared our economies for this. While we talk about circular businesses, there's no any banking system in our part of the world where circular business is actually supported and incentivized. So circular business cannot be bankable through a linear economic banking system. So these are very inherent contradictions that we have. I mean, world's moving forward. We are all global citizens and moving forward. But at the end of it all, our realities are very different. Eastern reality and Western reality are vastly different. So it's impossible for a Western consumer to understand how a country like Bangladesh looks like. How does a garment worker's life looks like? So, you know, it is a time for all of us to be in it together and raise global awareness about what the less disadvantageous economies go through. What do we go through? How do we depend on West so much, and how we've still been unable to look inward? We don't have inward-looking economies at this point of time, and we don't have Asian collaborations as well. So we're not even aligned with ASEAN. But since, you know, this has been a system and we have grown our production capacities, and, you know, if nearshoring happens, or if circularity actually takes off, and if the cheapest, the fastest, the buy one, get one free culture does not stop, then it's going to be incredibly difficult for countries like Bangladesh to be good suppliers and have sustainable supply chains. So everybody needs to wake up. All of us need to wake up and understand what materials we are using, where is it coming from, and, you know, the traceability and responsibility must be viewed through the same lens. So once again, sourcing practices and circular practices must align.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does anyone see any examples of this starting to happen in a way that you think is a model for others to follow? No. Yeah.
I can just briefly add. So, you know, I did tell you that we have been, as an association, we have been partnering Global Fashion Agenda, GFA, and also Reverse Resources, that's another outfit which has already established a circular fashion partnership. Now, this initiative is also being funded by Partnership for Green, P4G initiative. So we have been able to connect quite a number of our own member factories with these initiatives, and we are approaching many other. The ultimate outcome of this platform would be to develop meaningful demonstration of circular business for the industry. So policy advocacy has to continue with the relevant stakeholders to incorporate circular economy in the government policy as well, so that, you know, we can regulate the highly unregulated recycling business that we have in Bangladesh. But a massive sensitization all across would be helpful for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we've touched a little bit on overproduction. It's come up a little bit in this conversation, but I would like to talk about it more directly. A lot of critics of the focus on circularity say that it's a false solution, basically, if it's not addressing the issue of overproduction and overconsumption. Marie-Claire, you were starting to touch on this, but can you talk about how the industry gets away from this model of selling more and more products?
Alors, yes, as I was saying, circularity doesn't address over production and also over consumption. At Kering, when we are speaking about overproduction, the first thing is to share an order of magnitude. We are speaking about luxury, and in the DNA of luxury, it's about scarcity. Okay, so we are not speaking about a big volume. So we are quite different in our industry, and I think it's an important point. After, you have many solutions. One, it's also linked with innovation, is the fact to use artificial intelligence. So thanks to artificial intelligence, we will be able to evaluate in a better way the quantity of products, the quantity also of raw materials we need to produce our products. So we believe that it will be very important for the next years. And we have already developed some pilot projects internally. After, when you speak about over consumption, one thing that it's also very important, and you mentioned it, Rubana, before, Gen Z and millennials are very conscious about what is, where the impacts are when we are speaking about fashion, textile industry. So they are very aware about the challenges and the issue. So one thing, that's why I think it will change over the years. And after also, as a group, as brand, we try really to engage very strong conversation with our clients to show, as it's mentioned by Rubana, the traceability of our raw materials, where the products are made. Again, we are in luxury, so they are made in Europe, France, and Italy. So, you know, again, you don't have the magic solution, but it's more to have a matrix approach with a different way of acting. And perhaps to answer also to Rubana, when she was saying that sometimes the discussion are not made with the same people between the pricing and the environmental side, I think it's very important to have a coherent approach. I don't say that what we are doing inside Kering is perfect, but it's something that we tackle many years ago. And so that's why in our contracts or purchasing order, we have what we call sustainable clauses, where you have very specific criteria on the environmental side and same thing on the social side. And after, we have developed also a very important audit policy to be sure that what we put in the contract, it's really happening on the ground. Because, you know, one of the challenge also is to be sure that what we want, it's really applied on the ground.
Okay. Ken or Rubana, do you have thoughts on, you know, business models for getting away from the overproduction?
Yeah, I do, because any business wants to be able to make revenue. And at the moment it's set up, of course, we'll sell more units, or if we're in a particular luxury arena, we won't sell too many units, but we'll make sure it appeals to that sort of part of the customer base. But in order to keep getting revenue, this is why I think there's so much exploration around subscription and clothing as a service type opportunities, because not only do you control the materials and products, you will see them again, because you can display a very big range of products, but you get lots of uses out of them. And that idea of retaining control of the asset is quite interesting. It's a couple of experiments have been done, but it will be, I think, head more that way. The other big one is, of course, in the business to business arena, like uniforms and stuff like that. Why should people buy the uniforms that they use in a company when they could get it as a service, and then the original manufacturer can get it back and rework it and put it back on the market? These are all very interesting because they provide revenue for the business out of selling less. Okay, and that's what I think one of the big challenges is, and that's why I say it has such a potential impact on the original producers of materials, because we might find things flow very well and profitably, but providing a great service with far less, well, I mean, the amount of clothing unsold, for example, is amazing. So tailoring what you produce to what is actually demanded would be an excellent approach anyway. So I think the key is business models in the end, but we haven't quite got there because there's also questions of regulation, design, acceptability to customers and users. But nobody now buys films, do they? They, in a way, just rent the access to them. And we're getting much more used to this idea that we don't need to own it, but we need access to it. So if I want different stuff on a weekend, I can get it. And I think that's a productive area because it doesn't reduce the profitability of the businesses, but it just makes a better all-round fix because you know who is responsible for that material and those clothes. Key element, I think.
Right. Okay. Well, I know we're running out of time, so so just to close up, I think let's look to the year ahead. What do you all think needs to happen in 2021 for the industry to make real, meaningful, substantial progress? Marie-Claire, let's start with you.
So we have a lot of hope for 2021. Three things. First, fashion should reduce its reliance on new natural resources and support a circular economy. I think we see that with this panel. Secondly, we need really to push to build awareness about the importance of creating a sustainable supply chain, of course, on the environmental side and also on the social side. And one way it's, for example, to push also regenerative agriculture. And the last thing for me, it's we have to accelerate because I think now many companies group have clearly identified that sustainability, circular economy, they are not an option, they are really a necessity. I think now we have to intensify our efforts and also to continue to develop collaborative approaches with a specific focus on innovation. I think we have already a full roadmap for 2021.
Okay. And Rubana for 2021?
Yeah, I mean, if COVID has taught us anything, it has probably taught us how to have more empathy. So, you know, with crumbling economies all around, we are expected to be more sensitive. So my ask is pretty simple. I mean, we have Western brands selling jackets for $450 to $500 and advertising and saying, don't buy a new one because we can mend your old ones, which is perfect, which is not an issue. But those mending centers are all in the US and not in Asia. So while a consumer is actually paying that price for a high value added jacket, the worker in Bangladesh or elsewhere in Asia is not actually not part of it. I'm not saying that we're looking forward to a perfect 2021, one where it'll be inclusive economy, but at least to be a little more sensitive about the manufacturing countries and the realities. I think that would help. So we would need to have more exposure there. We would need Western experts, and we would need branding for that. So I have a simple hashtag that I go by, and I say, hashtag go human, go green. So that's the ultimate message that I have, that, you know, please go human and let's go green at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Ken?
Just a quick thought, really. We want more people to be involved. We want more people to be repairing, refurbishing, mending, reworking materials. And yet our tax system gives tax breaks to a linear economy and still taxes people more than it does tax fossil fuels or waste. So I think some readjustment of the tax base would encourage a lot more circularity.
Mhm. Here are my key takeaways from this discussion. Upcycling and circularity require a change in consumer mindset, and we need stricter policies to incentivize shifts in business models and operations. Luxury brands will need to view reused materials differently, and government fines for using materials that can't be easily reused can help to encourage progress towards circularity. 2, circularity doesn't work in silos. Teams with conflicting priorities can delay progress, both within companies and across the supply chain. Social and environmental priorities can be at odds with one another, and solutions need to be designed from the start to address both, rather than treating either one as an afterthought. And circularity alone will not solve overconsumption. New business models that encourage a shift away from ownership on the consumer side and that decouple profitability from selling new things on the business side are a priority for decreasing consumption levels. Well, thank you all. I think this is about all we have time for. I think we could continue for another 3 hours, but we're out of time. So, so thank you for being here. Thank you, Marie-Claire, Rubana, and Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you to all of our viewers and the World Economic Forum for inviting us to be a part of the Davos Agenda Week. Please note this panel discussion will be available on demand on the Vogue Business website and on the Davos Agenda website. If you enjoyed this discussion, please think about signing up for my Vogue Business Sustainability Edit newsletter. Thanks again to all, and stay safe.